The Holy Gospel according to St. Luke, the 17th chapter. Glory to you, O Lord. On the way to Jerusalem, Jesus was going through the region between Samaria and Galilee. As he entered a village, 10 men with a skin condition approached him. Keeping their distance, they called out, "Jesus, Master, have mercy on us." When he saw them, he said, "Go and show yourselves to the priests." And as they went, they were made clean. Then one of them, when he saw that he was healed, turned back, praising God with a loud voice. He prostrated himself at Jesus' feet and thanked him. And he was a Samaritan. Then Jesus asked, "Weren't 10 made clean? But the other 9, where are they? Was none of them found to return and give praise to God except this foreigner?" Then he said to him, "Get up and go on your way. Your faith has made you well." This is the gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, O Christ. You may be seated. Way back when I was in high school, I had jaw surgery. And although the surgeon insisted that most people who had that surgery are able to talk right away, I could not. And it was very frustrating, and I wanted to yell at him about it, but I could not. But the most frustrating part was not ever being able to say thanks. Somebody would help me, and I would be like, it was awkward and uncomfortable, and I felt like I was being terribly rude. I hated it. In our culture, we say thank you a lot. We say it all the time. It gets to be a habit. We ask children, "Now what do you say?" until they figure it out. But in Jesus' day, it didn't work like that. Instead, in that culture, if somebody helped you, you would say something more like, "I owe you one." And then you would help them in return. And then they would help you, and then you would help them, and so on. Much of society was built on these back and forth exchanges of favors. The only time you would say thank you would be if you wanted to cut that cycle short. When we say thank you, we mean something like, "I feel grateful to you." When they said thank you, they meant something more like, "I can never pay you back." And you know what? I think that's part of why it frustrated me so much when I couldn't say thanks. It was because it left it hanging. I still kind of felt like I owed them one. I hated that. Maybe that's why we say thanks so much. It keeps us from owing one another so much. But even when I was a high school senior on a liquid diet, I still had a lot more resources and a lot more advantages than the men in today's story. The text says they were lepers, but the Greek word could refer to any of a number of different skin conditions. Ironically, leprosy is probably not one of them. These conditions were thought to be really contagious, and so if you had them, had to stay away from other people, not for 5 or 10 days, but maybe forever. Quite often, the way that people treated you with these conditions caused more harm than the actual disease did. In other words, these 10 men, for once the Greek does actually specify that they are men, they are so lowly that even a wandering rabbi from a very small town is way out of their league. By healing them, Jesus does them an enormous service, and now they owe him one. That debt is a link between them. As long as the debt remains, they are tied to him. A relationship of debt is still a kind of relationship. It's not very much of a relationship, but it's more than people in their position are entitled to expect. After years of not being able to have any relationships at all, is it any wonder that 9 out of 10 of them cling to that certainty that they are connected to Jesus? And I think that Jesus is fine with that. He doesn't ask them to return after they've seen the priests. They simply do what he told them to do. That can't be wrong, can it? But the 10th does something different. By returning to give thanks, he admits that he cannot ever repay Jesus. That ends the debt, and it gives all the power back to Jesus. By returning to give thanks, he puts the entire relationship back in Jesus' hands. At the end of the day, this is not a story about gratitude. Gratitude is wonderful, but this story is about faith. It's about trust. It's about trusting Jesus. It's about trusting Jesus to know what you need and to provide it, not because he owes you one, but because he loves you. It's about a relationship that no longer depends on what he can do for you or what you can do for him. Instead, it only depends on what he has already done for you. How is it possible that this man who has just met Jesus for less than 30 seconds has that much trust in him? Oh, Luke tells us, by the way, he is also a Samaritan. I think that's the key. As a Samaritan, he is culturally and religiously even more separated. He is even more vulnerable than the others, and he expects even less from other people. So he knows there's no point in even pretending that he can have any kind of control over Jesus. And he recognizes that only God could have done this, because only God would do this for him. So he praises God. He's only just met Jesus, but he knows something about God. He trusts Jesus because he trusts God. He recognizes he can't repay the debt, and so he returns and he gives thanks, and he puts his hopes for a future relationship in Jesus' hands. Where does that leave us? sometimes I think we are like the 9 rather than like the 1. And that's okay. The 9 had faith. They trusted Jesus enough to go and do what he told them to do. They believed that he could heal them, and he did heal them. He didn't take that back because they didn't give thanks properly, right? He also went on and died for them and rose again for them. Sometimes we are like that. We know what Jesus has done, and it's really good, and we are really grateful. We maybe even go and tell other people about it, just like he told us to. That's good. We're maybe not totally ready to put just everything back in Jesus' hands, but just because we think we still have some control, that doesn't mean Jesus will abandon us. He loves us enough to give us that space if we insist. Or sometimes we are like the disciples who are watching all this happen. Sometimes we are astonished to learn who has the greatest insight into what God is doing. Often it is the most vulnerable, the least regarded. Sometimes we are witnesses to the profound trust demonstrated by people that we ourselves might have ignored. And sometimes, even if only for a few moments here and there, we are so overwhelmed with the enormity of what Jesus has done for us that we see the same reality that the 10th man saw. That Jesus is worthy of our trust. That there is nothing we can do to pay him back, and nothing we need to do. That he knows what we need, and he provides it, not to settle a debt, but purely out of love. That our relationship is very safe in his capable hands. So in his name, all God's people say, Amen.